Hello and welcome to the Nostalgia Bubble podcast, the show where two lifelong best friends explore a favourite film in every episode. I'm one of your hosts, Shuggie, an amateur film reviewer.
And I am Nye, not an amateur film reviewer, just a film enthusiast.
In this episode, we're going to be looking back at one of our earliest childhood films, I'd say, in Shrek.
Yeah, we must have been, about 7 when this came out? 2001.
Yeah, so I have some background on the film, so why don't we start there? So it's actually based on a book that came out in 1990 by William Steig. So it's a short children's picture book, and Shrek is actually the romanization of the Yiddish word for fear or fright.
Wow, well, I'm going to be learning a lot.
Yeah, so the rights to the book were originally purchased by Steven Spielberg in 1991, but he later sold those rights to Dreamworks. I think Spielberg in the 90s would probably have made a very different from what we got, but a very interesting Shrek film. He's very much about the kind of the wonder of cinema, rather than the kind of subversion of fairy tales.
I would like to see what you do with it now.
Yeah. So originally, Chris Farley was actually going to play the title role, but he died in 1997, and that's when Mike Myers stepped in. And originally it was planned to be a hybrid of live action and CG animation, but it looked terrible. The literal quote is, it looked terrible, it didn't work, it wasn't funny, and we didn't like it.
This is where they then paired up with Pacific Data Images, that's right? In 98. Also, something I didn't know, I didn't realise that Nicolas Cage actually got offered the role first. He turned it down because he didn't want to look like an ogre. Years later, he's just a meme now, isn't he? So,
I mean, we all love Nick Cage. Should we start talking about the film itself?
Yeah, take it away.
So, were you a big fairy tale person as a kid?
Do you know what? I can't say I was. I had Harry Potter read to me when I was a kid. I had the Philip Pullman books read to me. But no, not entirely fairy tales. Disney classics, for example, I'm one of those people that hasn't seen them all, and I probably should.
Yeah, a lot of those kind of early Disney classics, I'm not the biggest fan of. You know, the Snow Whites and
I remember I did love Fantasia.
Yes,
although
but I feel that's very different to what Shrek is mocking, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of all the cultural references in Shrek, and kind of you've got Peter Pan references in there, and you've got blind mice and the pigs and Goldilocks is bear. Yeah, so they've obviously got all of those. And this is actually something I love about Shrek, is that they've got a kind of a spectrum of references. Even within them, I mean, you've got the gingerbread man doing the whole kind of, at the very end when he, God bless us everyone, with his crutch, and kind of that reference to A Christmas Carol, all the way through to Matrix references when Fiona's fighting off Robin Hood.
The classic Matrix references that I'm sure all children will understand.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing I didn't realise, obviously, at such a young, innocent age, the number of innuendos.
Definitely going to talk about that at some point.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I love the way that it is both subverting all the traditional fairy tale tropes. So it takes them and it flips them, whilst also being a very traditional fairy tale.
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as I think as far as the plot line goes, it follows a fairly it is fairly similar to that of a fairy tale. I mean, for a start, he has to rescue a princess, so that in itself is already a fairy tale.
Yeah, it's very much, it wants it both ways. So it's doing traditional fairy tale stories, but it's also trying to be like, fairy tales are ridiculous, and mock them and, you know, parody them in many examples. You know, it's really hard for a film to have it both ways. Like, if you look at parody films, everything that's happening is stupid, and, you know, you look at your scary movies, they're not good horror films. They're just straight up comedies mocking horrors. Whereas Shrek actually does manage to do both, and I think that's a really hard thing to balance, and it's really impressive that they manage that. Okay, so do you want to start sort of going through some of the key plot points here?
So Shrek is a lonely ogre.
Can I actually just question that? I don't think that he is lonely at the start. I think he really enjoys his life of solitude. He's very happy about it. The whole opening is him just going about his day, having a great time. I don't think he is lonely. It's only when he comes to befriend Donkey and fall in love with Fiona that I think actually he subsequently misses them. It's because he's been alone his own whole life. He is okay being alone.
Actually, you make a good point, and actually, I think what he does in that way is that he's actually acts as almost the kind of complete opposite of Lord Farquaad, who is clearly lonely but has everything. And actually, that goes back to sort of, I mean, just kind of a detail in the in terms of the production side of it. Which, I mean, you probably already know that obviously Mike Myers decided to re-record all his lines in a Scottish accent after he'd finished recording them, because he felt that would really emphasise the class difference between the two. But I think that actually the way the characters were written already put them at opposite ends of the story, yeah, so no, I take your point actually that he probably wasn't lonely. He was probably quite happy and settled.
Yeah, and I love that whole opening, the montage of him going about his day, and it's just very normal things. It's all there to normalise Shrek, but it's all slightly different. And, it's a bit grosser. He's brushing his teeth with goo from bugs and stuff like that.
Yeah, and then immediately you're thrown into a world where they hate him.
Yeah.
So you're already it already feels a bit off kilter by the time you start kind of getting into the film. You're already on Shrek's side.
I also think it's kind of important that we see, he gives all those guys who come to, try and kill him, he gives them all the big speech about how ogres will eat, humans and grind their bones to make bread, stuff like that. But actually, he's just very happy to scare them off. I think that opening is really important to just stress, actually, whilst he is very different, he is also very similar to, people. It's very much that the whole point of the film is these people who seem so different and strange are actually very much like us. And I think, obviously, that's something that's important in this world. He's judged because he has different colour skin and looks a bit funny. And how many people are judged for similar things in the real world?
Yeah, the message beyond that is that it's all about what's on the inside. And I mean, you kind of, that's what a lot of kids' films talk about, but it actually brings it to a very sort of literal interpretation of that. I mean, you see somebody like Fiona, who is initially this kind of very beautiful princess, and she gets sort of saved by Shrek. And then actually what happens is that what's on the inside literally matches what's on Shrek's outside. So it's kind of finding that sort of bridge between what you look like and what is on the inside, and kind of how they aren't kind of mutually exclusive things.
Not always the most subtle film.
Yeah, of course. And but I mean, even so,
film.
While it's not necessarily subtle, it's not an obvious storyline to create. I was thinking about that when I was watching it back, and the idea that you have this kind of marginalised character who's being sent to do his duty, and the kind of desirable one ends up falling in love with him, and it's kind of quite a stereotypical story. But actually, I think the way that that's kind of shown on screen is not something that you see very often. Yeah, it's just kind of a very unusual representation of a very common point.
So interestingly, I'd look at kind of the fairy tale version of, for better word, it's an ugly duckling story. I think it's got a much better message at it than the ugly duckling story. Because in the ugly duckling story, he eventually turns into a beautiful swan. Whereas in this, he doesn't have to physically change. She loves him for who he is, he loves her for who she is. It's not about what they look like, it's about who they are. And I like that it... So again, that is the one fairy tale that, is almost follows this story, but it changes the ending to be, I think, more appropriate and more empowering for people.
Yeah, it does. you're right with the message that it sends is that obviously you don't have to change. I mean, you get stories like The Ugly Duckling or like Princess and the Frog or Beauty and the Beast, where the message is still there that you can accept somebody for who they are despite what they look like, but ultimately they change to become the beautiful prince at the end or to become that beautiful swan, and that almost dilutes the message that you can be who you want to be and still be accepted. And that's, I think, what Shrek does differently. There is, and actually changing Fiona into what is more commonly seen as less desirable or less beautiful, that almost just kind of throws the whole thing on its head.
Yeah, I completely agree. Completely agree. I think we've been very serious for a long time, so let's get a bit silly and talk about Donkey.
Donkey.
I think he is one
like
of my
boulder.
all-time favourite movie characters. It is a just genius performance from Eddie Murphy. Brilliant writing. He is hysterical to this day. I still quote lines like, "I like that boulder, that's a nice boulder," or "In the morning we're making waffles."
Yeah.
You know, it's just
singing the songs.
Yeah,
When I hear these songs now, I can only hear it as Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
He's brilliant. I mean, it is so obviously Eddie Murphy. It's an Eddie Murphy character. But he also shows a whole kind of range of emotion as well, and he kind of offers layers.
Yeah, I completely agree on that. Like, actually, at the start of the film, he's the one who has a lot of the pathos. He's the one who you feel sad for him. You feel really sorry for him. He is genuinely lonely. He lacks friends, and he is clearly the most talkative animal or living being in that entire world. And he is definitely alone. He's abused by his owner. When he runs away and meets Shrek, he instantly accepts him because he just, all Donkey wants is some friends. And in Shrek, he's like, this guy has saved me. I want to be around him now.
Yeah, well, he finds values that we should be encouraged to look for in friends, and that's what he immediately sees in Shrek, and he kind of demonstrates what it is to be a friend, whether that's kind of saving the day with the dragon or just being there, being around, being company. There are times where Shrek needs him as well. I think that's kind of at the end he sort of comes through, doesn't he?
Yeah, Shrek's at the end, Shrek's in that kind of depressed wallow, and he's the one who snaps him out of it, gets him to go to the wedding, and he pushes Shrek to be more, social and accepting of others in his life, which I think, everyone needs. See, at this time we're all isolated. Jesus, we all need people. I think everyone's feeling that at the minute. I think you can really relate to Donkey at the moment.
Yeah, I think he's definitely a pivotal character in more ways than one. He's not just there for kind of the overall storyline. He's there for I think more specific reasons, which kind of really start to come through as the story goes on.
Yeah, I love him. Right, Lord Farquaad. I said we'd talk about innuendo. His name alone is an innuendo. There's so many jokes that are clearly about how well endowed he is.
I mean, well, it's not even implicit. There is one point where he does indeed get an erection.
He does.
Which obviously I missed as a kid, and now being the adult that I am, I was shocked first time I noticed. Had to rewatch it just to make sure I could believe my own eyes, and sure enough, he has an erection.
Shrek fairly overtly states at one point that Duloc is so big and phallic because he's compensating for something.
What's very clever is that making him short, for example, is obviously potentially a visual representation of.
Well, as a kid, I always thought that was a joke about how tall he was.
Exactly. So there's that kind of double entendre with it.
I love the whole scenes. I love all the scenes in Duloc. They're great. One little visual gag I never got until this watch. They park in Lancelot
I did see
instead
that
of a
when I
parking
watched
lot.
it back. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I was going to say the tournament scene is actually my favourite scene in the whole film.
Even before that, though, you get the scene where they play that introductory song. And how much of that did you remember when you rewatched this? Yeah, it's great, and just Donkey's ending cry of, "Let's do that again."
Yeah, they do very well at walking the line. Even when I first watched it, I knew what the joke there was, and actually, I mean the fact that the Duloc, obviously the visual side of Duloc was based on Disney, was it not? It was based on the Disney
probably
castle.
Yeah, I imagine so.
And in that way, it just kind of makes it seem like a real sort of Americanized idea of a dream and this sort of.
Oh yeah, they're definitely taking shots at Disney with that.
Oh, absolutely. There are so many shots at Disney.
Dreamwork was built out of taking shots at Disney. Like, that is the whole place that company started.
Even, I mean, just like, and this kind of links back to having the adult jokes and stuff, when the mirror's going through all the options, and he talks about how Snow White lives with 7 men.
Yeah.
But she's not easy. And another thing that we don't get until we're of age.
Yeah, and you mentioned the tournament. I think that's kind of really the first action scene we get in the entire film, and it's a cracker. It's so good.
Yeah, it's there for pure entertainment, isn't it? There's no, I mean, obviously it kind of develops a story in the sense that Shrek obviously wins and he gets chosen as the champion, but I think what's really interesting in that scene actually is the way that the crowd just turns and they support
have
Shrek.
Exactly that as well.
After forever of seeing him as a monster, and it's really interesting actually that the thing that turns them is when Shrek is doing the one thing that they expected him to do to everyone for years and years. They expected to be beaten like to a pulp, and when he finally does that, they love him for it.
Yeah, and I mean they very much lean into making it look like wrestling.
That was my next point.
Meant to look like wrestling.
Yeah.
He pulls out some classic wrestling moves at some point.
He pulls out a chair. He pulls out a chair.
Yeah, he pulls out a chair. He tags Donkey in at one point.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone who was involved with this film is a wrestling fan, because I think there are times where the person who's meant to cheer for, they don't like them and they start liking the heel, the villain. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening at this point is, Shrek's doing such a good job with the fight that they're just like loving it. Why is there just a wrestling ring?
Because it serves the story, Shug.
It's like, why is that there?
I mean, that's the thing. Like, you can get away with the absurdity of things like that. Until you asked that question just now, I'd never questioned why there was a wrestling ring.
This is the first time that I have questioned that as well.
Why is there a huge barrel of beer in the middle of a fighting arena?
Yeah, surely that should be up like at the back so people in the stands can get it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of whys, but you kind of don't really register it or give it the benefit of the doubt every time.
I also think this kind of leading into the journey to the castle is a great time to talk about the soundtrack.
Yes.
This soundtrack is banger after banger after banger.
Fantastic. I love the soundtrack to this film.
All-Star, you've got, Proclaimers are in there, you've got a couple of Eels
any film
songs.
that uses Proclaimers is just,
Bad Reputation playing over this this fight scene is great. The soundtrack's just wonderful. Hallelujah, it's
brilliant. And constantly again using the soundtrack to just poke fun at Disney as well. I mean, you've got the whole bit where you've got Fiona singing and the bird exploding.
Yeah.
But so obviously they've got they have composers that obviously do the score for the film, but then it's intertwined, it's sort of interlinked and used alongside these brilliant songs.
Even
which,
the less good Shrek films, they still nail the soundtracks. Even in Shrek 3, they use Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song at one point and it's brilliant. Yeah, whoever does the soundtrack on these films just knocks it out the park every time.
Yeah, I mean, the most memorable use of a song for me, besides the ones in the first film, is the use of changes in the second film. I love it.
Yes.
It's absolutely brilliant. And actually, that film, I knew the song, but watching that scene just immediately made me appreciate that song in a whole different way.
Yeah. So they just montage and soundtrack through the journey to the castle, which I think is a smart decision. We just had a great action scene. Let's keep the momentum going. Let's get straight to the castle. Yeah, I know. I think it's a really strong decision. Obviously they took their time on the way back, but on the way there is just momentum, keep going. And people want to get to this castle and they want to see the dragon. Speaking of which, this castle is a great creepy castle. Burned bodies everywhere, broken pillars.
Starting with the rickety bridge.
Rickety bridge over a lake of lava, of course.
I'm looking down.
It's just awesome. And I think Donkey has some great moments here. I'm the stairmaster, I mastered the stairs. When he finds 2 little steps.
I mean, it's what they've done well here is obviously it sets the scene for Shrek having to find and save Fiona, but also we've got to remember that this isn't actually that far into the film. This is this is maybe a third of the way through the film that they get to the castle, and but because they've already established those characters so well, you've got this kind of really high stakes setting and in terms of in relation to the story, and it just gives the characters so much to work with. It
is also our first introduction of Fiona, Cameron Diaz. Not necessarily one of my favourite actresses, but she's really, really good in all these films. I think her and Shrek's relationship is fantastic. I think we get more into that on the journey back from the castle, but I think just the little moment she has at the start where Shrek crashes through the roof and she's there checking, pretending to be asleep. It's she very much wants to play into the typical fairy tale, and then Shrek just immediately blows that off and grabs her and runs out. And when she's calling him out for not slaying the dragon, and he's you're meant to burst in here sword drawn, and he's like, well, that's what everyone else did. Yeah, he's like, yes, and they burst into flames.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think it's a great introduction to their dynamic, but also Shrek being Shrek crashes through, and already immediately you see Fiona pretending, the being asleep, and
she is trying to be a stereotypical fairy tale princess, and that is something that slowly gets pulled back.
And sure enough, underneath it all, she is an ogre.
Yeah. Can I also just mention one of my favourite gags that I have never seen before? Is there's randomly a cookbook at some point in this castle with nightly treats written on it, showing all the choice cuts of a night. It's just one of those great visual gags that animators put in, and I love them for it.
Well, I think that's the thing that kind of one of the things that keeps these films enduring so much is that you can watch it as many times as possible, and there's still new things to take in and to kind of notice.
Also, animation allows you to add more of these kind of visual jokes. It's easier to put them in, because in live action, if you're not putting them in on the day, they're not going to be there.
Yeah.
Whereas animation, you can obviously subsequently put them in if you have the idea 2 months down the line or whatever.
Yeah, I also find that actually a lot of animation is about everything as well as the kind of focal point of a scene. Whereas a lot of the time what you'll see is if you're watching something that's live action, you're encouraged to kind of focus on the main character or the main transaction or whatever, and that's...
I think because it's such a freeing medium, you can do so much inventive stuff with it. You can pack every frame with, little visual gags. I think it's something actually, animation is something that could be pushed further in sort of Hollywood. If you look at what Japan does with animation, they go insane. They push it to its limits. Whereas I think a lot of the time, they play it fairly safe in, Hollywood animation. So then we head back, and I think the really smart decision is to actually slow the film down at this point. We've just had 2 major action sequences, so now we can spend some time with the characters. And, they throw the Robin Hood action sequence in there as well. But I think actually the journey back is really, we get big character moments between all of the characters. Shrek and Donkey have one on the evening where they're looking up at the stars. Shrek and Fiona obviously have them as they start to grow closer. And even Fiona and Donkey have one when Donkey discovers, her secret of transforming into an ogre.
Yeah, no, I like, I really like Donkey and Fiona's dynamic from the get-go.
Yeah.
I mean, when she's just been saved and he kind of leans into the whole noble steed thing, I think is really sweet. I think that's a very Donkey thing to kind of grab onto, but I just think that's a really nice setup for them, because they don't really interact until they get out of the castle. Again, it's Fiona trying to lean into the whole fairy tale, the idea of a fairy tale and the noble steed, and the charming prince has one and all of that. But also, it just kind of, it reiterates Donkey's character and how the 2 characters really complement each other, which is obviously then explored more as they go on.
Yeah, I think my favourite scene in all of these is the Donkey and Shrek conversation, though. And so it starts off, quite light-hearted, and then, they get into that whole kind of, why Donkey asking why he won't open up to him and why he's pushing him away. And there's that moment where Shrek says, people judge me before they even know me. And Donkey's just response of, I didn't. It's just beautiful. And again, Eddie Murphy and Mike Myers' vocal performances in this scene are so good. They really make you feel what these characters are going through, and they really make you feel, Donkey's genuine love, even though it's only been a few days. He genuinely loves Shrek as a friend.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of a testament to the sort of the story and the dynamic between the 2. For sure, and I think there is where you kind of see a real change between the first part of the film and the second part of the film in terms of their relationship, and also to top it off with the Donkey thinking the moon is a star.
Yes,
it's just a lovely little additional line there.
And I like just the slow reveal of Fiona after the next morning. Starts off, she's making breakfast. When she starts burping with Shrek, and making those, animal balloons. And obviously it all kind of culminates in the Robin Hood moment, where she whips out the Trinity style beatdown on Robin Hood's men.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think, like you said, it's kind of the taking the layers off. And at this point, obviously, you don't know her secret.
Yeah, although rewatching, I think you can quite clearly see a scene where, in that scene where Shrek and Donkey are talking, she kind of
where she's peeking through the gap.
You can quite clearly see that she is not the same shape she used to be.
Yeah. But you're not explicitly told, and I think that's. I think that in itself is a very good decision.
Yeah, definitely.
That's kind of how you learn about people as well, isn't it? That you kind of notice their little idiosyncrasies, or you kind of get more familiar with them, and then actually it's a while before you get to really know what someone's like, and again that's their sort of way of inverting the whole kind of fairy tale love at first sight, love at first kiss.
Yeah,
kind of
it slowly grows over time, which I think is much more realistic. Then, kind of at the end of the journey, they make an excuse to stay one more night and hang out again. And then Donkey obviously discovers Fiona's secret, and Shrek overhears them talking and misunderstands, and it is the most typical sitcom misunderstanding trope you can ever have.
Yeah, hearing parts of the conversation and just misinterpreting them completely.
Like, I think it's the right decision for the film, but it's still one of just the most annoying tropes for me, because it just plays on the fact that people don't communicate enough.
Yes, you're right. But also, I think it very much. I mean, you always know that when there's a love story, that there's always going to be a hiccup. There's always going to be something that sets them back a couple of steps. And I know watching any film that if nothing has happened, if nothing's gone wrong, it's going to, just because that's how a narrative works, right? And I think what it does really well is, obviously this is the hiccup. So the hiccup is not the fact that Fiona is not who she says she is, or who she immediately comes across as being. The hiccup is that Shrek misunderstands. But what I think is really lovely about the way it's done is it actually goes back to where Shrek was at the beginning. He kind of goes back to thinking about himself. Like he listens to what Fiona's saying, and he it's automatically about him. And it goes back to his insecurities and about really kind of affirming what he always assumed, which was that people always judge him before they get to know him, and that's what's really nicely done about it, even though it kind of follows that stereotypical sitcom trope.
It's always one of my least favourite ways of creating that hiccup in the relationship, is always misunderstanding. It works well here. It works really well here. But it's always a bugbear of mine. So obviously once she's gone off with Farquaad, we get kind of that beautiful montage to Hallelujah where we're seeing Shrek and Fiona in their respective situations, and we can see how similar they are now. You know, laid out in what they're doing is the same, and we even get like some beautiful shots where the camera kind of pans around and we see, you know, one person eating at one end of the rich Duloc table, and it kind of pans into Shrek eating at his table, you know, almost as if they were sharing a table. He's very much they are connected but separate moment, and it's really well done.
Yeah, well, I think that goes back to obviously the contrast we were talking about at the beginning between Duloc and Farquaad and everything that he comes with, and Shrek and his way of life, but actually also makes a connection not just between the two characters but between the two ways of life, and kind of saying and that sort of implication that you can be of high standing, where Fiona presumably is now, or not, and you can still have this connection, or that that's not what it's about. It's about something else.
That's a fantastic
so it's kind
point.
of it's not. I don't think it's just about the characters. I think it's also about the socio-economic or the political points that this film makes.
Yeah, and then we get the kind of next big Shrek and Donkey sequence where they have a falling out at this point as well, and Donkey actually finally calls Shrek out for the way he's treated him, and Shrek tries to sort of play it off as it's my nature, but you can see that he feels bad. It's just he doesn't know what else to do at this point, I think. But his friend is there, Donkey, who talks him out of this and convinces him to go to the wedding. Well, they fly there on Dragon. We're not, Donkey and Dragon are hooking up, and that's all we're going to say about that because it's really weird.
It is, especially as the films go on.
Yes, but I think enough of that. I love some of the Donkey's moments at the wedding. When they're trying to, he's like, you got to do it at the right time. You got to wait till he says the line. And then at the end, when Dragon bursts through and eats Farquaad, Donkey's just line of, I'm a donkey on the edge. That's a much underrated Donkey line for me. And that's kind of, we've talked about, the ending of the film with Fiona. The big ending is obviously the wedding in the swamp, and we got Eddie Murphy singing, and there's loads of great moments here. You've got Gingy dancing with the topping of the cake. Yeah. You've got Thelonious and the Mirror now there for some reason. They're all friends.
Yeah, you've got the three blind mice dancing away. You got the pigs busting out a move.
Yeah. So that's kind of the end of Shrek. So I've got a couple of things I want to ask you. Firstly, do you think this film holds up? It's been 19 years.
Yes, absolutely. Every time I watch it, I enjoy it just the same.
So I will say the only thing that I noticed on this rewatch is the animation does look old at this point.
I mean, naturally, because animation has developed, but I think the the way that the great thing about it is that I think it's easy to see past that.
So I will say this is one of the kind of earlier computer-generated animation films. Obviously, kind of the early 90s and so on before that. It was all hand-drawn animation, which still looks good today, if you ask me. So if you've got films like Beauty and the Beast, or, even going back to, like the Robin Hood, or way back to Pinocchio, they still look fantastic. Whereas I think you can see early computer-generated animation because it's something that's improved so much now. You can definitely see it. Do you have any kind of more final thoughts on Shrek that you want to give?
Just that I think it's a great film. Anyone listening should go and watch it if they haven't already seen it. I think it says a lot that the second film was so successful. I think it brought in nearly twice as much at the box office.
No, so talking about the second film, I will say I'll quickly run down some post-production. So it was released in 2001. It premiered at Cannes, which is obviously a big deal. It was the first animated film since Peter Pan in 1953 to compete for the Palme d'Or. So pretty impressive resume there. It was a massive financial success. It was the fourth highest grossing film of 2001 after Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings and Monsters Inc. So, that's big things there. It was up for numerous awards at the Oscars. It won the very first ever Best Animated Feature award. It was also nominated for the screenplay. At the BAFTAs, it got 6 nominations, including one for Eddie Murphy, which, voice performances getting recognised at awards is very rare. That won Best Screenplay. Beat The Lord of the Rings, which is a sore subject for me, but Shrek is a great film, so I can't complain. Obviously, it spawned 3 sequels. It's been hugely successful, and the Puss in Boots spin-off. So it's gone on to huge success. I like the fact that this was back in the day when you got extras for getting DVDs, and the DVD had the Shrek in the Swamp karaoke dance party with it, which I think they then grew on even further in the second one, where they had kind of all the characters doing American Idol style performances. Yeah, I think that's just kind of more examples of how important the music is to Shrek.
Yeah,
they always pushed it as kind of an extra thing. Here's some more musical performances from the characters. I love this film. Again, we saw it when we were about 7. I never had huge amounts of sort of kids DVDs, animated films for kids. Growing up, Shrek was one. But so whenever a friend of my parents was over and with younger kids, we'd always watch Shrek because, we'd give them an option of like 3 or 4 films and they'd always pick Shrek. So I can nearly quote most of this film. Like watching it again today, I was like, yeah, I can quote most of this alongside the film. And it'd been 10 years or something since I'd seen the first Shrek film. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, it's a fantastic film. It was I'm very glad that we got to go back and rewatch it.
Yeah. So I believe you're going to be picking the next episode's film.
I am, yes. One that I personally loved. It's Star Wars Phantom Menace.
Interesting. This will not be
which
at
I think
all
will be
controversial.
I think it will be a really interesting one to explore. And I have really kind of fond memories of absolutely loving it.
So interestingly, I actually rewatched this one recently when Disney Plus came out. So I will gladly rewatch and take notes on again. So this will be a fascinating discussion, I think.
Yeah, well, it's the reason I've chosen this is not because of it standing amongst the other films. It's about how much I enjoyed it as a kid, and I can't wait to talk about it and watch it back.
Great. So I'm Shuggie. You can find me on most social medias at Shuggie Says, including you can find my blog on WordPress. You can also follow the podcast, Nostalgia Bubble Podcast, on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Nye, want to do your plugs?
Yes, I am Nye. I am on Twitter at Nye Reese, and I am also on Instagram at Reese Nye.
Great, and until next time, bye-bye.
Until next time, goodbye.